When we talk about technology addiction, it is of course a difficult subject because when we say technology, it's all around us. Tech addiction is addiction to the world, as it were, because technology is everywhere, all around, inside everything, and our family life is now like that. Everyone's staring at screens, passing away their time. Now, as you listen to me, most of you will be tweeting, you'll be checking Facebook, poking each other, uploading pictures to Instagram, and commenting on other people's stuff. So, at what point do we have psychiatry involved in this, in all of this? What is addiction in all of this? What is simply the new form of life we have on Earth? I'm going to talk about this because one of the most important problems in adult and adolescent psychiatry is overdiagnosis. We're criticized for that. So when it comes to tech addiction or internet addiction, we have to be really treading carefully. Now, when you think of the evolution of man, it actually continues in this direction. We're going back to square one because sitting down in a hunched position in front of the computer. These are the stats from the Turkish the State Statistics Institute. Penetration of internet for 16 to 24-year-olds, 60.67.1%. For university students and graduates, it's 93.3%. 58.7% also use internet to download and play games. 22.5% use it for internet-based interactive games. So, since the advent of internet, psychiatry has, of course, had its approach vis-a-vis internet, and we have to first and foremost say that psychiatry is, of course, not against the internet. The literature does not show that. To the contrary, reasonable use of internet is good for the individual to expand his or her social circle and experiences and increase psychological state of well-being. There are lots of studies in that field. But of course, when you're dwelling and delving with internet, it of course steals away from time that we previously had dedicated for other activities. So we're paying a price when we spend so much time on internet, and depending on what we lose in exchange for that price, we can have some disturbances and some issues. But generally speaking, internet use, if we're talking about a compulsive or impulsive use of internet that cannot be controlled, and if it turns into an inappropriate obsession, then it can be called problematic internet usage. This is from PubMed. It has to do with internet abuse and the interest in psychiatric circles in that field. The blue bars show the number of publications on internet abuse or internet addiction in corresponding years. In 2014 we have about 300 of them. 2015 were of course early in the year, and until today in this year 2015 there are about 100 studies, so it's quite exciting. There are lots of studies, there are journals, cyber psychology, cyber addiction. There are some journals available now solely on this subject matter. The psychiatric circles, or rather the DSM circles, how do they interpret this? Now, it was published in 2013, as you know it, but there had been a lot of work leading up to it, especially in the last 5 years. They had task forces for many issues, and they focused, for instance, on behavioral addictions. There was one special task force focusing on that, and they considered over 250 studies, and they had to come up with a number of criteria. Because, in the literature everyone says something different. They all have different diagnosis criteria, scales, threshold levels. So the studies do not actually create uniformity. They do not overlap. As a result, we do not end up with something that's healthy, that's generally and widely acceptable. So this being the case, the DSM-5's position was that we do not have widespread enough studies to call it a disease, but we are aware that this is an issue. So under its third section, under DSM-5, there is something called Internet Gaming Disorder, which of course needs to be further studied and better understood. There are 9 criteria under DSM-5. If you meet 5, then it means you have Internet Gaming Disorder, as it is called. This is only on gaming. DSM's acceptance. So social media or other platforms on internet and spending too much time, or internet pornography, sexual content addiction on internet, these are not covered. This is simply for internet gaming disorder. When you look at the criteria, they are very familiar. On the addiction panel, I think this will be familiar to everyone, because these are addiction panels. As obsession, withdrawal symptoms, tolerance, trying to stop but failing to do so, loss of interest in other things, other activities, continued overuse, knowing the damages or the harm, lying to the family, and loss of relationship with people around these individuals, and using these games to get rid of a feeling of guilt, for instance. So these studies will actually come to the forefront. I have snapshots of some games in the meantime to understand what we're talking about, because if you have an adolescent patient, if you're seeing an adolescent patient but have no idea about Minecraft, then you're doing something wrong, because everyone is playing Minecraft. Now, Minecraft is not so new. There are cubes, building blocks that can be used to build virtually everything, and then they go exploring. This is also available on the iPad. I think there are, it has, in my opinion, been downloaded 18 million times, therefore earning $18 billion to its producers until today. Now, let's have a look at the epidemiology. There are different rates, of course, ranging from 0.8% to 26.7%, but there are some studies, some numbers as high as 50%. In Turkey, Canan and Gülünç did some studies in this field, and they found about 12% or so problematic internet use, but there are different concepts involved, so the figures vary greatly. But in Korea, you have 2.5 million internet addicts and about 33 million internet addicts in China, and neurophenotypes, real internet addicts. Those are mentioned in some studies. Conceptually, we have two categories. One is generalized internet addiction. The second one is specific internet addiction. These are different phenotypes, so we have to differentiate between these two. The generalized internet addiction is more the depressive sort of personality. They see internet as a solution to social isolation, so they stick to social platforms or simply browsing through the interwebs. But in specific internet addiction, it can be games, gambling sites, pornography, so the specific applications or sites, and these people can be called to have the addictive phenotype, and they have this kind of an addictive personality. And depression and social anxiety are also there, but comorbid to these, you have substance abuse, ADHD, or impulse control disorders take the forefront. When we have a look at the functional neuroanatomy of addiction, again, this will be similar and familiar. In the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, it is very important, of course, in executive functions and decision-making, cognitive control. ACC has to do with more wanting component of craving. The prefrontal cortex has to do with reward anticipation, emotional processing, decision-making under ambiguity. So in general terms, there is a cognitive pathway and another limbic pathway, which is of course at a different level. So depending on which one would prevail, controlled use or addictive use can develop. In neuropsychological internet addicts, there are some difficulties as well. The different studies have highlighted these. To give you a brief snapshot, especially when it comes to decision making and executive functions, there are problems. Learning from feedback can be a significant issue. So even if you tell them what they're doing is not rewarding or wrong or will not help them get where they want to get, they still continue more undisciplined behaviors, and they have high novelty-seeking behavior. And their response to internet-related stimulants are different. When they have internet-related stimulants, they find it hard to suppress those stimulants or impulses, but it's not the case with other stimulants. Functional neuroimaging studies, most of them have been conducted in Asia due to some of the high numbers I've cited. There are lots of studies as a result, but neuroimaging studies do not abound in number. These are in young males, so generalization still remains an issue. I have my doubts, but overall, the cognitive pathway managed by the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex loses its power as IA develops, and as a result, orbitofrontal cortex and other areas of the brain, such as the mediofrontal lobe, prevail in terms of controlling the behaviors of the individual, and as a result the individual loses control when it comes to matters relating to the usage of internet. Again, another game, World of Warcraft. This is somewhat more advanced as far as games go. Maybe some of our interns or some of our colleagues have already played this game. Now, the pitfall with this game is that it's really enjoyable. You create an avatar, you have your realm, and in that realm, your personality, you basically go from zero to hero. You become a warrior and gain the admiration of individuals, and there are more than 100 million accounts in this game until today. But when you quit, when you stop using, the world continues to evolve. Sometimes I find it difficult to explain to families because they say, okay, you can put it on pause and then come and have your dinner, but that's not the case because the world in World of Warcraft does not stop, and many people depend on you, and there's the possibility of letting those people down. At least that's the way the individual sees it. And when you're offline, life in the World of Warcraft continues. The stuff you've built is broken down, the castles are conquered, and lots of other things happen, so quitting or stopping playing is a loss for the individual. But another point you need to make to the family is the fact that you can impose a daily limit to this game between certain periods throughout the week. And it is part of the game. It is a tool available in the game, or you can have your own schedule and play it accordingly. Sometimes even adults require this feature of the game. When we have a look at neuroimaging studies, we find higher gray matter volume in left frontal and striatal region. In the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, there is reduced gray matter volume. And these are already some of the, of course, issues we have covered, the pathways and the functioning mechanisms. The neurobiology follows the same similar pattern. The level of dopamine transporter expression is decreased, especially in the striatum. In the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is fed by the striatum, as you know, and as a result of the reduction in dopamine and D2 receptors mean that there's a problem with the feeding of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and the cognitive function creation is somewhat altered and suffered. This is GTA, Grand Theft Auto. You see the scenes, it's really gory and bloody, and especially when children play this game, I have my favorite. You can kill people, you can behead people, you can rape people in this game, so you have to be really careful about this. You have 2.5 minutes, of course. Let's have a look at psychopathology. We have 4 main principles. Psychiatric symptoms may lead to IA, they can accompany these, or they can increase the liability of each other. And when we have a look at the comorbidities, we have ADHD, depressive symptoms, hostility, interpersonal sensitivity, impulsivity, and cluster B personality traits. Different than other substance abuse types, they are more risk-averse as far as individuals are concerned. They do not seek risk, they refrain from risk. So what happens if we do not treat IA? We can end up with deaths. That's how far it goes. I'll briefly talk about some studies. There are some double-blind placebo-controlled. There aren't any double-blind placebo-controlled studies. There are only open-label studies which are available until today, and some therapy work as well. Let's talk briefly about these. The well-known therapy methods are used, but for internet, there are also some specialized therapy methods which can be used. Let's have a look at the pharmacotherapy for IA, methylphenidate and bupropion are used in open-label studies. These have been shown to be successful, but not placebo-controlled. It's an off-label use, so you have to be careful to interpret this. There's another study with another agent, and with naltrexone, stenoplan, and quetiapine combination was also administered in some case presentations, some cases. The take-home messages: IA is on the increase. Psychiatric circles will continue talking about this subject. Always look for comorbidities, especially depression, social anxiety, and ADHD. And we have to know that first and treat that condition in the first place. Because if there's an IA underlying, then because sometimes that's the case, we can also have appropriate therapies. Thank you very much for your attention.
Çok teşekkürler. Thank you.